afternoon, folks, and welcome to Irish Media Network Sports Update. I'm your host, and welcome to our All-Ireland Final preview special. The journey up the Hogan stand starts here. Joining me this week is off-the-ball presenter Eoin Sheahan. Thanks a million for joining me, Eoin. How are things?
No bother at all, Joe. Very excited for this. I'm probably a little bit too excited now after seeing your backdrop and seeing what could have been this weekend. But the more the days go by, I think the more we're all getting excited for this tomorrow, and maybe naively so, but still, it should be something good should be in offer tomorrow anyway.
Absolutely, man. And look, we know the players, we know the teams, they know each other. This is the fourth All-Ireland final in the last 7 years, including the replay in 2006, that they're playing against each other. Mayo have never beaten Dublin in an All-Ireland final. Answer me this, Eoin Sheahan. How do Mayo win on Saturday?
It's a very good question. I think they win on Saturday in a very similar manner to the way they had success against Tipperary. And I'm deliberate in what I say there. The way in which they had success against Tipperary, if they can do all that without having all the defensive lapses, then they will win this game. And now that is a huge if. Those two sides of their game, they're almost like an NFL team that you can take their attack and you can take their defense and say they're operating off two very different levels. I think attacking wise, we've seen in the past that at times Stephen Cluxton can be rattled with his kick out. The problem, of course, is that Stephen Cluxton mentally is as good as he is in terms of how he actually executes his kickouts, that if he puts one or two astray, he tends to find himself again. So what Mayo need to do is when they rattle him, they need to score goals. And we saw in the semi-final that Cillian O'Connor pounced on a couple of balls. Aidan O'Shea has been brilliant in that department all season as well. And that entire forward department, that they have the tools to really disrupt Dublin's most important player, arguably. So that's what would give me hope. Of course, though, the big if is how do they manage to keep the scores down on the other end? Because part of their gamble against Tipperary was leaving so much space at the back. If you do that against Dublin, they'll eat you alive.
They could have conceded 3 goals in the first 10 minutes against Tipperary. They did concede one. Obviously, Clark pulled out a miraculous save off Quinn Lippin's first shot. But Dublin aren't going to let you away. You won't get a reprieve of 3 goals. This is how Donegal beat them in the final in 2012. They stuck in 2 goals in the first 10 minutes and it was over. Can they afford to allow themselves that vulnerability again at the back? And how do they plug those holes?
I actually don't think they can plug the holes as such if they're going to approach the game like I just said. Like if they're going to really push up on that kick out, there are going to be gaps. You just have to accept that. And the only way you're going to come free from that is ensuring that you have your matchups spot on and that your defenders are getting out on top. And this is where I'd have real concern for Mayo. When you look through the matchups and you think about who's going to mark who, there's some talk that we had John Maughan on the show this week, and he said there is a dearth of options in the fullback line, and therefore Lee Keegan has to play there. And that would really send alarm bells ringing for me if I was a Mayo fan, because we saw him in there against Con O'Callaghan last year, and Con O'Callaghan ran rings around him. It was only for a couple of minutes, but it won them the game. It opened up a massive gap between them. So can you afford to do the same thing again? I'm not sure you can, Joe, to be honest, because I think that if you don't do that and you don't let Lee Keegan back there and you take the risk of somebody else on Con O'Callaghan, well, at least the other side of the coin in that risk is having Lee Keegan further towards the opposition goal. Like, surely you do that. Like, surely that's on the balance of things, that is a risk worth taking, because you won't come away from an All-Ireland and think to yourself, well, if we'd put a different man on Con O'Callaghan, he wouldn't have run rings around us. Chances are he could run rings around anyone. So in a very roundabout way of answering your question, how do they plug those holes? If they want to really attack Dublin, they can't. Of course, the alternative is they approach the game like Tyrone did in the 2018 All-Ireland final, and they can save a bit of face. But realistically, did Tyrone properly lay a hand on them that day? Or did we really believe that they could actually win that game? I don't think we did.
But this is the point. So you're talking about Con O'Callaghan. Like, realistically, no matter who you put on him, are you really going to be able to neutralise Con O'Callaghan over the guts of 80 minutes? Probably not. So then does James Warren say, look, I have Oisin Mullen there in corner back. Let him run up the pitch. Let him side through the Dublin defence and score a goal. Do they just say, look, instead of trying to stop Dublin playing and negate their attack, let's go all out attack and beat them in a shootout?
I think so. And I think that starts from Cluxton's kick out. Like, I think that's all out of attack for me. It is a full court press, and that is the sort of real hope they can take from 16-17. Is that's how they approached it. That's why 17 was possibly the greatest game of football ever played, was because it seemed like it was all out attack. Now that doesn't mean that you're neglecting what's happening at the back. You're still trying to get the likes of Chris Barrett into a headspace where he's going to have another game like 2017 where he plays absolutely out of his skin, and man to man in that backline, Oisin Mullen as well, as you mentioned, that they also play out of their skin. I just like what is the alternative here? Like we haven't seen evidence of Mayo being able to play a blanket defense and do it well. Like I guess they've maybe tried out a few tactical tweaks over the last few years. Maybe like Mahan mentioned, like Kevin McLaughlin maybe back as a sweeper. Like that doesn't really suggest to me that they're actually going to be able to cause Dublin problems. Like once Dublin got beaten by Donegal in 2014, that ship had sailed in terms of beating Dublin with a blanket defence. And I'm not saying Donegal did that in 2014. It was just that Dublin themselves became more aware of how they needed to break really, really stodgy teams down. And they're the best team in the country at that by a distance. So I think the two reasons why Mayo shouldn't do that is, one, it's not their best way of playing. And two, Dublin are really good at beating them in that way. So if Mayo are going to win, it's going to have to be another all-time great game.
And it really might be, because if there's any team that can outshoot Dublin, it's Mayo. 2013, Dublin beat them by a point. 2016, they draw, and in the replay, Dublin beat them by a point. 2017, Dublin beat them by a point. Which leads me to believe that this isn't so much a physical superiority Dublin have over them, it's a psychological. And I want your opinion on this, because a lot of being made of the fact that without fans in the stadium, the pressure might be off Mayo, they might win. I think it's more than that. Think about the hype in Mayo for an All-Ireland final week. You have people coming home from Dubai, from New York, from London. Every small parish to every big town have people home for the All-Ireland. All-Ireland Sunday, you could have anything from 50,000 to 500,000 Mayo people hanging out of the big tree, Quins, the old triangle, Jones's Road is a sea of colour. You get to the game then, and in the last 10 minutes, what has been speculated on, that kind of the nervousness, the anxiety, the trepidation from the fans leaks into the team and paralyses them. On Saturday, do Mayo have a better chance without this hype of just going out and playing a game of football and winning?
Yeah, 100% this benefits Mayo. And James Horan has mentioned that this year as well, that their performance anxiety that they've had in the past might not have been an issue this year, which is interesting. I don't remember him talking too much about performance anxiety in the past. It was interesting that he happened to bring it up this year, and that it's an issue that they've had in the past, and it's just gone now. Like the Mayo All-Ireland final bandwagon is just something else. Like you mentioned, people popping out of the woodwork from all four corners of the planet trying to get to the country and trying to get their hands
on it. Hopping on it, the whole lot.
Yeah, not this year, but absolutely, like that's the sort of thing that goes with Mayo. It's just this unbelievable circus, and it can't not permeate the camp. And Stephen Rochford this week was even talking about the 2016 All-Ireland and how the rumours of Jim McGuinness potentially training Mayo actually got to him the day of the All-Ireland final replay, I think, was it, or maybe it was a drawn game. And he actually had to get his media man onto David Brady to actually say, no, that there's nothing going on here, which is extraordinary. That the manager of the team, like actually having to deal with that on the day of the All-Ireland. Like, so I would always be skeptical of like how much does this actually affect the team. Like I know people in the 96 team talk a lot about it because it was just crazy, and 89 as well. But I thought they'd kind of got out of that cycle. But no, they're like in 2016, there was rumours that had made its way into the inter-county manager's head. So that suggests to me that it was a big factor, and that this is going to benefit Mayo. Now the thing is, like you're trying then to look at how does that affect Dublin? Like, does the lack of a hill maybe take something away from Dublin? I don't think that's true now. I do think it'll help Mayo, but I don't think it dents Dublin in any way, because they're such a process-driven team that actually being able to communicate with one another and to be able to hear one another will actually give them all the positivity that they're going to be missing from the hill.
Yeah, let's focus on the Dublin, the makeup, the actual Dublin team, because there's been a lot of transition this year. Desi Farrell comes in for Jim Gavin, no Connolly, no O'Gara, no Jack McCaffrey, most importantly, I would say. How strong is this team compared to teams of the last 5 years, would you say?
I think there's a chance it could be stronger. I definitely thought that maybe 17 direction was as strong as the team had been, but I just wonder if we get carried away with the names of like Paul Flynn and Bernard Brogan and Diarmuid Connolly, of course. And obviously, it's going to be very hard to think that they will have players as talented as them. But the question is, are the new breed of forwards actually being brought through in a sort of conveyor belt way, that they are the perfect molds to be bit part players, to play 60 minutes, to come on and play whatever half an hour and be physical, brutish players who can kick their score from 20 to 30 yards. I think that they've got a prototype in their forwards. It's less sexy than the sort of mavericks that they had at the turn of the last decade. But I think that they actually might be more effective. They're not going to. There's going to be less of them on billboards around Dublin potentially, and there'll be less of a celebrity around them in the country maybe. But there's a chance that they're actually more effective as a unit, which is terrifying. I just haven't seen any evidence to suggest at any point over the last 5 years that the new guys that come in are any worse. The only position really is Cluxton, and when he does leave, like Comerford could possibly be the best keeper in the country still after Cluxton leaves, but he won't be on Cluxton's level. And that's where the drop off is. That very specific position is all you can ask for. Because, well, like as I say that, we could all be wrong about that, because the only other person that I would have picked out from last year's All Ireland final who was irreplaceable other than Stephen Cluxton was Jack McCaffrey. And like you look at that half back line now, it's going to be McDade and Merchant and Small who we're going to see.
McDade standing up playing out of his skin this season. Owen Merchant scoring that goal against Kerry in the final last year. They have a conveyor belt of people who just seem to slot into the machine.
Yeah, and like maybe McCaffrey is in that category with Flynn and Connolly and Brogan, where everybody will remember him because he's just such a great character, obviously a sublime footballer, and for me, outside of Fenton, possibly the most talented player of this generation. And like you can't take that away from him, but at the same time, he will be remembered for the character that he was as much as the footballer that he was. Whereas these lads, not that they're boring or anything, but there is a predictability about the quality of these players when they come in. When you open up a Dublin matchday program in February or March and say, who's this guy starting a league game? There's almost an inevitability that this guy is going to become absolutely top class.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that's the culture that they've fostered there. I could talk to you about this until 5 o'clock tomorrow evening. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. Call it for me. Who's going to win and what's going to be the score, the margin?
I think Dublin by 7 points. That's what I said a few days ago, and I'm going to stick with that. As much as I have been swayed by the weird belief that comes on the Friday of All Ireland final day, I just can't think that Dublin are going to drop off enough to allow Mayo to beat them. And I actually think they'll win by 7 points in the end. Like you mentioned that the previous results have suggested that Mayo aren't that far off Dublin physically. I agree with that. But still, like I just think that in those last few minutes, Dublin can power past you, where we could be looking at a 2-point game with the clock in the red, and Dublin could still clip over 5 points to see the thing out. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's how it went.
Well, look, I hope you're completely wrong. I hope it's much, much tighter than that, but we'll have to wait until tomorrow evening to see. Stick around. How well do you know your sport? Special edition just for you is coming up next. Are you sufficiently intimidated?
Oh, like how well do you know your sport? This is the automatic reflex of this is not very well, and always waiting to be found out one day soon. So maybe today's that day.
Well, I didn't add it to the graphic, but it's how well do you know your sport? Dublin versus Mayo special edition. So we have 5 questions. 3 of them are multiple choice. You have 1 minute, and the clock starts now. Number 1. How many times have Dublin and Mayo met in the All Ireland final, including replays? Is it A5, B6, or C7?
Is this including this year?
No,
not including this year. So you would have had 2 in 2016, 1 in 17, so that's 3. 1 in 13, which is 4. And I'm not forgetting any more from that decade. And then I think there was maybe 1 before that. So I'm going to go 5.
Well done. Great analysis. 5 is correct. Number 2, the infamous Mill on the Hill incident, where Mayo warmed up in the Hill 16 end of Croke Park, happened in what year? Was it A, 2005, B, 2006, or C, 2007?
That would be 2006.
2 for 2. Well done. Number 3, who kicked the iconic winning point in that match? Was it A, Conor Mortimer, B, Kieran MacDonald, or C, Alan Brogan?
Absolutely iconic as well. Kieran MacDonald kicked it.
3 for 3. Number 4, in 2017, what player threw his GPS tracking system at Dean Rock in his run-up to kicking the winning point?
Good old Leroy Keegan.
Leroy, it was indeed. And number 5, for the first person to ever get 5 out of 5 in a How Well Do You Know Your Sport quiz, it is, in the same All-Ireland final 2017, what 2 players were sent off, 1 from either team?
Donny Vaughan from Mayo. And it was John Small that he ran into, wasn't it?
It was indeed
Boom.
Eoin Sheahan. You were the first person ever to get 5 out of 5 wins tomorrow. You have won today. Well done, sir.
Well, that's it. When you've been talking about Mayo versus Dublin for 5 days straight, you pick up a thing or two. So I'll credit it to doing a small bit of homework.
Well done, sir. Before we let you go, I'm going to ask you to take part in the Greatest Irish Sporting Legend poll. We're going to play a clip of 8 Irish sporting legends, and we want you to tell us who your favourite is.
The heat by O'Driscoll. Oh, brilliant by O'Driscoll! It's towards Keane! Roy Keane with a captain's goal!
An absolute rocket. Rocket from Sheffield.
History has been made! Conor McGregor is the UFC lightweight champion!
And the 16 times champion jockey, Tony McCoy, he comes storming up the hill to win the Gold Cup.
10, Rory. You know the storylines and the stakes for him. A win not just means the Masters, but it means the Grand Slam. And that's beautiful.
And Sonny O'Sullivan is going to take the world title.
Boudoir Cup to Dublin's captain, Stephen Cluxton.
The fighting pride of Ireland, Katie Taylor.
This is a tough
one.
No,
sir, you haven't put a foot wrong all day.
Well, I was just waiting for Deech to pop up there. So failing that, the answer I'm going to go for, probably going to pick Brian O'Driscoll from that list. In terms of my favourite sports person, it was a tough one between himself and Katie Taylor. As an Arsenal fan, I've just had enough bad memories of Roy Keane, despite his clearly undeniable greatness. And they probably would have been the 3 contenders, but O'Driscoll just about edges it for me.
Excellent. Great choice. And great show. Thanks so much for coming on and giving you all your opinions and your insight and getting 5 out of 5. We'll send you down a medal.
Thanks for having me on, Joe, and thanks for the softball questions.
Had to give you a healthy.